Hey everyone, welcome to another video in our PC resource library. Today we're going to be talking about how to fill out a purchase agreement from Transaction Desk. So again, we're just logged into our General North Star MLS dashboard, and I'm going to navigate to Transaction Desk. So I'm going to go to Tools and Transaction Desk. Alrighty. Now, in our previous videos, we went over a number of things, right? And one of those was putting together these templates. So I'm just going to use another one of these test templates that I already have set up, and we're going to just use this offer one. Okay, so in here we have this fake house. Well, it's a real house, but we're not actually offering on it. And we have our forms over here, and the one we're going to be focusing on today is the purchase agreement. So in order to edit this form, I'm simply going to click on it. And I think I've already tooled around in here a bit, so there might be some stuff filled out, but we're just going to go through it together. Okay, so first thing you're going to need to do is put in a date. All right, so I'm going to do today's date. Then our buyers. Now, if we had added contacts to this transaction and going through setting up this template, those buyers' names would automatically be put in there. However, I didn't put any in because, well, this isn't real. So I'm just going to throw in Alex Fitzgerald because that's a name that popped up for some reason. Okay. That's my buyer. Earnest money amount. Let's do $2,000. Right now, it's just a rule of thumb. Typically, we want that earnest money to be 1% to 2% of the purchase price. However, that is up for negotiation. It is totally up to you. I'm just going to put this in as a working number. Now, because I plugged in the MLS number and input that data into the template builder, it's going to autofill a lot of the property information for me down here. Okay, so we have the buyer's name, we have the earnest money amount, and I put in the 2,000 there. You can see the text automatically fills in, which is great, and shall be delivered to listing broker or another party. We're going to leave that unchecked. We want us, Keller Williams, the listing broker, whoever it is, to hold that money. I don't want to mess with it. Okay, so legal description, all this pulls in. That's great. Now, this is a line 33, that's commonly misused, and it's misused by being used, right? It's on here. It's in this little personal property blurb, which is saying all this comes in and anything else. However, that's not what that's for, right? Well, it is what it's for, but it's not how we should use it. You'll find out really soon that lenders don't like seeing a lot of mumbo jumbo on these purchase agreements. So a lot of people will use these lines to say what's exempt from the purchase or what should be included in the purchase. But that's not really what we're going to do with this. So we have a totally different personal property addendum that we can use for this. But as far as the purchase agreement goes, we want to keep this as clean as possible. Purchase price, we're going to put that in. Don't forget to do it. Done it. I've forgotten to put in a price before. The clients get mad. So don't do that. All right. So 400,000, sure. And then now we figure out our percentage. So in this case, we're going to do 20% cash. We're going to do 80% financing. Okay, we're not assuming any mortgage, and we're not doing a contract for deed. So we're just going to leave that just like that. And then we put in our closing date, which we'll have, we'll say, end of November. Great. Okay, as we continue to scroll down, we'll see that address is auto-filled, as is the date. Purchase agreement is subject to financing. This is not a cash deal. We are getting financing. This is going to be a first mortgage in this case. So I'm assuming we're just rocking with a conventional loan in this scenario, right? You saw that we got 20% down. We're not doing any first mortgage or subordinate financing. We're not taking two different loans out to purchase this property. Now, a common misconception, this does not mean that this is the first mortgage they've ever taken out, right? This doesn't have to be for a first-time home buyer. I get that question every now and again. This can be their fifth home, right? But it's the first mortgage on this property. We don't have a double mortgage. We're not, taking out multiple loans to purchase it. So in here, we're also doing just conventional or privately insured. This is for a VA loan. This is for an FHA loan. And this is for a USDA loan. More than likely, you're going to either be working with conventional or FHA. In this case, we're doing conventional, but of course, veteran VA loans, those are great too for veterans. Okay. All right, now in this scenario here, purchase agreement, it is going to be 30-year loan, right? Typically, you're going to see 30 years. Sometimes you'll see 15. If they want to pay it off more aggressively, we just put in whatever the loan packages that our buyer is using, and no more than X amount of percent. Now, this is one where we have to talk with our lender about this. Now, there may be a scenario, especially with interest rates rising like this, where our buyer is approved for this amount at the current rate they have, right? Say for right now, it's like 7.5%. Now, let's say the lender might tell you something along the lines of, hey, they're approved for this, but it's really thin. Right? We don't have a lot of wiggle room. So you can ask, great, is there a scenario where the interest rates may go up and they're no longer qualified, right? If it's really close, the lender may say, yeah, if these rates jump up from 7.5 to 8%, they're not qualified for this loan. And in that scenario, they may lose their earnest money, right? Because the deal falls apart, they can't buy it. It's trouble. So that's what this is for. So if that is the case, you can say no more than 8%, right? So this says if the interest rates climb up more than 8%, this contract is null and void, and your buyer gets the earnest money refunded back to them. Now, typically, we don't want anything on there if we don't have to. Right now, we're looking out for a buyer's best interest, but at the same time, in order to get the offer accepted, we want it free and clear of as many contingencies as possible. And since we already have a financing contingency, we want to make it as loose as possible. So you'll see a lot of agents write market in here. Right, so it just says we will buy it whatever the interest rate is. You don't have to have a number, or you can have a really big number like 10% or whatever, but just something to say we're cool. We're going to close on this no matter what the interest rate is, unless you can't. Right, unless your lender does tell you it's like, hey, at like 8.5%, just so you know, they can't qualify for this loan anymore. In that case, you would put down 8.5%. I will tell you the majority of purchase agreements I write, I just have market percent. Okay. So this next section here, 68 through 77 and beyond, this addresses what do we do with the earnest money. So you have a couple options here. The first option, check this box, and then we can either say if this purchase agreement does not come to close, that earnest money is refunded to the buyer, or that earnest money is forfeited to the seller. I'll tell you what, as far as negotiating contracts go, as a listing agent, if anyone sends me a purchase agreement that says that money's being refunded to the buyer, that number that we wrote up here might as well be zero, right? This $2,000 might as well be nothing, because no matter what happens, if this deal falls apart, my sellers are never seeing that money. That is not a very strong way to handle earnest money. It protects your buyers immensely, but it doesn't put them in a good position to win a competitive situation, right? Now, weigh out the scenarios. If it's been listed for 90 days and it's empty and they're obviously eating the holding costs every month, maybe you can, bully them around a little bit. But in most cases, especially if it's multiple offers or competitive, this ain't going to fly. So the other option is to forfeit it to the sellers. Okay. That option is very attractive to the sellers, but also puts your buyers at risk. They have the best intention in the world to buy this property. They love the home, but also stuff happens. You never know. What if they get approved for their loan, they're good to go, they're set to close, all of a sudden there's a horrible accident, God forbid, they have to incur all these medical expenses, take out loans to cover that because their insurance won't, and all of a sudden their income to debt ratio flips and they no longer qualify to buy that home. On top of everything they're dealing with, they also forfeit their earnest money. Eesh, that's tough. And again, it's nothing we can control. But stuff happens sometimes. So another option is to use what's called a written statement deed. So of course, read the PA, get used to that. I'm going to paraphrase a lot of this because I'm not going to read all this out loud to you, but read the PAs, get comfortable with this. But in short, the written statement date meets in the middle of these two. So what the written statement date says is that we're going to pick a date. If before this date that we choose, the buyer cannot it comes out that the buyer cannot actually purchase this property, right? They cannot meet the terms of the contract. If it's before that date, the buyer gets the earnest money back. If it's after that date and this deal falls apart, the buyers can't do it, their financing falls through, whatever. If it's after this written statement date, the seller is going to keep that money. Now, with this written statement date, there also needs to be a commitment letter sent on or before that date from the lender to the listing agent that says, we're good to go, we are closing this. Just note, you need to have that letter, because if you do not have the commitment letter by the written statement date, technically your buyer would be in default in breach of contract. Technically, the sellers could void that contract right there because of that. Now, if they're motivated to sell the house, they probably won't, but just know, if you're using the written statement date, make sure you're working with the lender you know and trust that is going to deliver that commitment letter on or before that written statement date. Okay, so let's say this. So I think we said we were closing November 30th. In this scenario, let's say we get our offer accepted on the 12th, close on the 30th. If I'm writing this for the buyers, I want this written statement date to be as close to the closing date as reasonable, right? I want to give my buyers as much time as possible. If I can, I want it at least 30 days from now, because that tells me that, because I know that the lender can get everything in order. They can get all the information they need. The underwriter can get everything underwritten, and we can be good to go, clear to close. Ideally, we're clear to close before this written statement date even hits. So if I can do that as a buyer's agent, it's almost like best of both worlds, right? My clients are totally protected, and it's more attractive to the sellers. So in that case, right, I'm going to say October 12th, we close on the 30th. Let's have a written statement date by November 20th even. That's great, right? That gives us plenty of time to get through, and it still gives us like a week and a half before closing, where that earnest money then falls onto the buyer's side. Now, as a listing agent, you want that date to be as short as possible. Buyers, you want it to be as long as possible. Okay, let's continue down. Now, this addresses what happens. Again, it's a little redundant, right? These were some new checkboxes that were added. So this just sort of reiterates, if that written statement date is not provided by, or the commitment letter, it says the written statement, commitment letter, two phrases that are interchangeable. If the written statement is not provided by this specific date, the sellers may, at their option, declare this purchase agreement canceled by written notice. That's what we discussed, right? In this case, it's canceled. In that event that they do that, what happens to the earnest money? So you get to choose here. Typically, that's going to be retained by the sellers. Tell you what, though, if you can sneak it in where it's refunded by the buyer, right? If you're negotiating, that's a point you can negotiate. There's a lot of different things we can negotiate on this purchase agreement that gives our clients some advantage that isn't price, right? How the earnest money is handled is one, and this is a piece of that. So a written statement is a great way to meet in the middle, but we can still sort of weigh this our end, and maybe the listing agent won't catch it. Well, at least we can do is ask. But if we are in a multiple offer situation and it's very competitive, I'm just going to say retained by sellers. Okay, if the written statement is not provided and the seller has not canceled the purchase agreement, and the purchase agreement is canceled as the closing date specifies the purchase agreement, buyers and sellers will immediately sign a cancellation agreement, and the earnest money would be, again, we get to choose what we want to do, right? So let's break this one down, because this one's a little complicated. So this first one says, if a written statement is not provided, the sellers can cancel. That one's pretty straightforward. This one down here, if the written statement is not provided and the sellers do not cancel, the loan officer still needs to get that written statement letter to the sellers prior to that closing date. So what this says is that if the written statement date comes and goes, the sellers don't have to cancel it. They say, you know what, we still want to work with you on this deal. Your lender still needs to get the listing agent the written statement date, the written statement letter, or the commitment letter. If they don't, before the closing date, you can't close on that property, and the deal automatically gets canceled. And in most scenarios, again, they're going to want to see this retained by the seller. That's in all likelihood what that's going to be. However, if you can get it to where it refunds to your buyer, more power to you. So again, this top one here says that if the sellers opt to cancel, if you miss that written statement date, this is what happens to the earnest money. If the sellers don't opt to cancel, but the lender can't get their stuff together and get this loan underwritten before the closing date, this is what happens. Now, if that scenario does occur and both parties are still motivated to close on this property, if they're like, hey, we need your written statement date, we close tomorrow, I don't want this to cancel. In that case, you're going to have to write an amendment to the purchase agreement changing that closing date and extending it. That's how that would work. Okay, so let's continue down here. It's a fun video. This is good. Woo, we're getting a lot of stuff done. So line 13, locking in of said interest rate. Typically, you're going to want to have any time prior to closing or as required by lenders. Again, this gives us our buyers as much flexibility as possible, because we could say within 5 business days of final acceptance date, which means that we have to lock in those interest rates in 5 days from now. Well, in a market like this one, where those interest rates are fluctuating on a weekly basis, we want to have some flexibility to make sure it's like, well, hold on. If we think interest rates are going to drop in 2 weeks, I'd rather lock in then. So typically I'm checking line 116 on that. Okay, this is lender commitment to work orders. This is typically going to be more in line with FHA, right? But this says if the lenders agree, or if the lenders are requiring any work orders be done, right? The lender says, like for this appraisal, hey, we need X, Y, and Z to be done before we can put a loan on this house. We're pre-negotiating an amount here that the sellers are agreed to pay. Now, typically, that's going to be zero, right? Because we don't know if there's anything wrong right now, and I don't want to scare the sellers with the number right on the beginning of the purchase agreement saying, just so you know, if anything's wrong, we're going to come at you for, you're going to have to pay $5,000 at least, right? I don't want to put that out there right now. Right now, we're getting the offer accepted. Likely, we're going to have this under an inspection, or, during the appraisal period, we will have a couple different places where we can negotiate this. We can figure this out. But if we're trying to get this offer accepted, I'm not going to put it in right on the front, right? We're going to address that when it arises. So by putting zero here does not mean you're saying they don't have to pay anything. It's just saying that we're not requiring you to agree to pay anything right now, but you're still reserving the right to negotiate that during inspection or appraisal. Also, if the lender, this is line 26 we're on, if the lender requires any sort of reinspection, we're going to say that the buyers will pay that, right? That's only fair in most cases. Again, if you can get the sellers to pay it, by all means do it. But if I'm a listing agent and I say that, I'm going to say, no way. If I decide to counter you, one of the things we're going to be countering is this right here. So typically the buyers are going to be paying any reinspection fees because it's their lender, it's their loan, it's their problem. Okay, we move into FHA clause. If you are not using FHA financing, you can ignore this. However, if you are doing FHA, we will address it. Right, so this basically just says the property needs to appraise at the value for the loan, right? So you're just going to put in the purchase price right here. Just put in the sales price. And again, it's just redundant, right? It's contract stuff. I feel like that's assumed, but nothing's assumed in contracts. So again, this just says that this needs to appraise at value, and with FHA, if it does not, the buyers get their earnest money. Okay, same. We have some FHA or VA financing terms here. Again, this says seller agrees to pay buyer's closing costs, not to exceed X amount. Again, I always put in zero here. There's a different place for closing costs that we can address it. I just don't want to muddy up the contract, right? So I'm just saying you don't need to agree to pay anything right now. We'll negotiate it as we go. Okay, subject to more of this DA funding, right? A one-time funding fee based on loan amount must be paid at closing. That's something specifically for VA. Typically, that's going to be paid by buyer, and you can say if it's just going to be as closing costs, or you can add it to the mortgage amount. And again, if you can get the seller to pay for it, that'd be great. Okay. Continue on. All right, now we have some closing costs here. So it's pretty simple. We can either say the seller is contributing to closing costs or the seller is not contributing to closing costs. So closing costs are a buyer's expense, right? They come from getting the loan, the mortgage, the financing fees, title fees, all that stuff. Sellers have closing costs too, but it's like minuscule. The majority of these closing costs are from loan origination fees. So we can say here if the seller is or is not helping the buyer pay some of those closing costs. So if you want the most competitive offer you can, we're going to say the seller is not paying these closing costs. But that's not always an option, right? Say your buyers just don't have the cash, they can't do it, or you're in a situation where you have some leverage here, you have some weight to pull around, you can negotiate. You can request that the seller pay some of these closing costs. So you can either do a number or a price, or a percentage, I mean. So if we want to do that, we can just say we click here, we're going to say they're going to pay $2,000 of our closing costs, or if we wanted a percentage, we could say they're going to pay 1.5% of the sales price towards closing costs. Rule of thumb, assume that the closing costs are going to be 3% of the purchase price, not to exceed $10,000. So if you're trying to figure out what the closing costs are going to be, again, it's very ballpark, but if your people are asking and want to know and you don't have the full breakdown yet because you haven't gone through any of the stuff yet, you're just writing the offer, just tell them to expect it'll be about 3% of the purchase price. So in this case, we did $400,000. 3% of that is 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Typically don't exceed $10,000. I'm going to tell my buyers we can expect those closing costs to be anywhere between $10,000 and $12,000. So by saying they're going to pay 1.5% of the purchase price of this, I'm getting basically half of those closing costs. Now, just sort of a negotiation tip, I usually like to, if they can, right, I'll come in and say buyers are going to pay the closing costs, because that's a really great leverage piece in inspection negotiation, because unlike adjusting the price, this is cold hard cash that our people feel now, that they feel at closing. So let's say we already have the sellers paying all these closing costs, and then they're paying full closing costs, we'll say 3% here, and then we have some repairs that we need to take care of, and we don't want them to fix them, we just want money to do it. Like, let's say maybe the roof needs to be replaced. We're like, okay, we want 10 grand to do the roof. Okay, well, they're already paying 10 grand in closing costs, and then we're asking for another 10 grand. That's kind of a sticky situation, and they're already doing the closing costs. That's a leverage that you can sort of play here. So where if I say that, we're going to pay all the closing costs, seller's not contributing the closing costs, we get into inspection, we get a number that we need to bridge the gap on, we can just say, fine, just contribute to closing costs. How about you don't get that roof fixed? You don't bring any additional cash to the closing table. You just agree to pay 3% of our closing costs. And there you go. Your buyers save that money, and they can use it to fix whatever they need to. Speaking of inspections, that is our next sections. That's fun. All right, so now we are in the inspection period here. We can elect or decline to have an inspection. It's in our buyer's best interest to always have an inspection, though I understand in very competitive situations, it may be best to decline just to get the house. We can, there's a lot of theories on that, a lot of tracks of thought on that one. In this case, we're going to say they are having an inspection, because that gives us more boxes to check and more things to talk about. So we're going to say they are having an inspection, and the purchase agreement is contingent on this inspection. Okay, so this means that we have an inspection, and based on the results of this inspection, we have the option to cancel this purchase agreement at any time for any reason during the inspection. Now, if we said is not, that means that you can still have the inspection, but it's going to be more of a peace of mind inspection. If we're saying it's not contingent on the inspection, that's saying we're going to bring an inspector through, we are going to get our report, we're going to have it, but we're not going to ask you for anything because we have no leverage here. We can't cancel this purchase agreement. Again, there are scenarios where this makes sense, but if we're doing just sort of boilerplate, standard, what you're going to see has an inspection and is contingent on that inspection. Okay, intrusive testing. Typically, you're going to say the seller does not allow the buyer to perform intrusive testing. What intrusive testing is anything we need to do that involves changing the home, right? If I need to, what's the insulation like? Well, we got to figure it out. We got to put a hole in the wall and see, right? We're not going to do that. We're not opening walls. We're not changing the structure. We're not breaking anything in the home. You're going to be very hard pressed to get a seller to agree to let you do that, because what if you put a hole in their wall and then you're like, we don't want to buy the house. And then now they have to relist and they got this hole in their wall, right? You're not going to get that to fly, hardly ever. So usually you're just going to check it does not. If you have an inspection, you need to have an intrusive inspection. Your inspector's like, I really think there's a mold problem. We need this. You can address that during your inspection period and maybe get them to agree to let you do that. But we're not going to ask for it right off the front because we don't even know if we need it at this point. And of course, it does say, the buyer will bring this in the same condition before they did the testing, but you never know. It's a headache. You're not going to get it done. Okay, now we have the duration of our inspection. This is another piece that we negotiate, right? This is a little nuanced here. So the sellers, they want no inspection, right? Because like I said before, the least amount of contingencies, the better. We already have a financing contingency, and now we're putting an inspection contingency on this. If we are going to do that inspection contingency, the sellers are going to want to see a small number here. They want this to get done, wrapped up as soon as possible. The buyers want a longer number, right? The more time they have, the better. So it's your job as the agent to find a win-win on that. Now, let's say it's a really competitive situation and you want to have an inspection, but you want it to be competitive. My rule of thumb is this. I have inspectors that I can call, reach out to, get an idea of their availability before I even write it. I'll say like, hey, inspector, I'm going to write an offer on this property. Just curious, when could you get out to see it? We don't have it accepted yet, but I just want to pencil something in. And they'll say, what day is it? Today is like a Thursday. Okay, so they'll say, cool, we can actually get out there tomorrow on Friday. Awesome. I'm going to set our inspection date then for Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So that means we have our inspection on Friday, and then I have 2 days with my clients to go over the report, coordinate any other follow-up things that need to happen, and negotiate with the sellers. I have 2 full days to do that. It is a rush, right? Because what if they're like, hey, we think you should get your sewer scoped. Okay, well, now I got to get someone out there in 1 day and get that report, right? You're setting yourself up for a lot of stressful phone calls if you go that route, but that is a route I take often because it's kind of best of both worlds. Now, let's say you're in a scenario where you're not super pressed for time, right? Let's say it's the house has been sitting for a while. You have some leverage here. You can negotiate. Give yourself like a 7 day inspection period, whatever. Give yourself a week to get the inspector through. You can bring in as many people as you want. You can do all that fun stuff. And it's very easy for your buyers and yourself. However, during those 7 days, remember, you can cancel for any reason. You don't even have to tell the sellers why. You can just say, we changed our mind during this period, and they have to cancel that and give you your earnest money back. So understandably, that's a pretty tense time for the sellers, right? So again, for them, they're going to want to see very short. For the buyers, they're going to want to see longer. For this example, I'll plug in 5 days, right? Let's say my inspector is like, I can't get in until Sunday. All right, then it still gives me 2 days to deal with all the fallout of the report. Other inspection items. This is a line I really like to add some stuff to sometimes. A lot of times I like to put in like buyers are aware, buyers will not be making requests for cosmetic changes. Buyers are aware that the inspection is only for serious health and safety issues. Something along those lines to let the sellers know that we're not just going to be playing tug of war on price here just because we can. We're using this inspection to really vet out any serious health and safety issues. Or you could also just leave it blank, whatever. Okay, is this contingent on the sale of another property? All right, we're moving through. We're moving down. I like it. So in this case, buyer represents that they have the financial ability to perform this purchase agreement without the sale of another property, right? This is saying, yep, they can buy it. They're good. Now, the lender will tell you this, if it is or not. Here are the other options. This purchase agreement is subject to an addendum of the purchase agreement, sale of the buyer's contingency. If checked, see addendum, right? We have a separate addendum you can use for that. This is a scenario if your buyers have a house they need to sell and they can't afford to buy this next house until they have the funds from the house they sold. Well, in that case, you're writing in a contingency here. So check box 1 here says this is the house. We have not listed it yet. Here's when we're going to list it. And there's a whole, we don't have the addendum here, so we're not going to get into all that, but we will address that. Winner, if it comes, just ask your launch coach or ask me. We can walk you through that addendum. Option 2 says that it is contingent on the successful closing, not the sale. So option 2 says that we need to sell this house, but it's already under contract. We already have a buyer. We already have a purchase agreement, and it's set to close on this date. That's option 2. So you put in that information. And obviously that's a little better, right? For option 1, the sellers don't know when this is going to get listed. They don't know your price. They don't know, right? You could be waiting 3 months to get that house sold. It's not even listed yet. That's tough for someone to sign on to. Option 2 is great, right? It's more stressful for your buyers because all of a sudden they found a buyer for their house and they're like, okay, we need to find a house now because in 60 days we're going to be homeless. So, the turns up the fire a little bit, but this makes it easier to get these contingencies accepted because it's a lot easier pill for the sellers to swallow if they say, okay, All it needs to do is close. They already have a buyer. They're already through inspection. They already have a closing date set, and it's in 3 weeks from now. We shouldn't have a problem here. Now, obviously, the ideal scenario is going to be 3. If your buyers can purchase the house without selling their previous one, I always recommend going that route. Okay, real estate taxes. In most cases, you're going to prorate these of day of closing. This is to say if we close in the middle of the month, like the 15th, the seller is going to pay the first half of those taxes. The buyers pay the second half of those taxes once they take over. That's fair, equitable, typically how you're going to see that. But this is another thing that you can negotiate, right? Let's say you're in a tough situation and you say, you know what, if you give us this closing date, we'll also pay a month of taxes for you. Like, we want this house. We will pay your full month of taxes before we can, or X amount of months of taxes. Whatever you want to do there, you can do it. Now, typically, you're going to prorate it, but if you want to throw some more money at the sellers that doesn't involve having to meet an appraisal, you can just pay those taxes for them, right? That hits their net. That helps their net sheet. They want to see it. Okay, and then typically, so homestead or non-homestead, this refers to a tax status. If a home is being used as someone's primary residence, it is homesteaded. That means their tax rate is lower. If it's an investment property, a rental property, or a vacation home, it's going to be non-homesteaded, which means that their tax rate is going to be a little bit higher. So what this says is if the property tax status is part of a non-homestead classification, meaning they have a higher tax rate, we can say the seller will pay the difference between homestead and non-homestead. So typically you're going to click that, unless again you want to sweeten the pot a little more for the sellers. Then you can say no. We'll finish out paying your higher tax rate. It's not crazy. It's like an extra $200 the year, right? So spread out over 12 months. It's not that much, but typically you're going to see that. But you can offer to pay it if you want to give your people an advantage. Woo, we're cruising through this thing. These PAs are long, right? We're going to get through here. All right. I'm going to take a little drink of coffee. Feel free to take a break real quick. Okay. Back at it. So where are we here? More tax stuff. Fun. So typically for this, you're just going to see boom, 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 boom. Sellers shall pay along the lines. However, again, if anything, if you want to sweeten the pot for the sellers, your buyers can offer to pay. So deferred taxes or special assessments, we're going to say sellers should pay. So this says that if they're behind on taxes, right? If they have any assessments on the property that are pending, they need to pay at closing, they're going to pay that at closing. Again, you can offer to pay it. Typically, the sellers will. All right. Again, kind of same thing. Again, it's a little repetitive. We're just going to say the seller shall pay on the date of closing. That used to be assumed. That's a new checkbox. They change these every year. They're fun. Date of closing. All right, so all installments of any special assessments, real estate taxes due, payable on closing. Again, seller are going to pay any taxes or assessments levied. And then we're going to do that again. Seller shall pay any special assessments, improvements, stuff like that. And then here you can say the seller has not received any notice of special assessments, or if they have, they're like, hey, just so you know, it's a condo, for example. I'm like, yeah, they're going to do this big balcony project. They're replacing all the balconies. Just so you know, that's coming next year. You're going to have to pay it because, okay, they let us know. We're going to pay it. Okay, additional provisions. So previously executed purchase agreement. So what this is saying is, are you already under contract to buy a house? If you are, can you buy 2 houses at the same time and give the financial ability? I don't know. So we're going to say that this purchase agreement is not subject to cancellation of another purchase agreement. But if it is, so this scenario, let's say you were under contract with somebody, you're in the inspection, it went really bad. You sent the cancellation out and you said, we're not buying this house. And the sellers are dragging their feet on signing it. It's been 2 days, right? They need to sign it. They have to sign it. They're going to sign it. They don't have a choice but to sign it, but you haven't gotten it yet. Technically, you still have an active purchase agreement with them. So in that case, you would have to say it is subject to cancellation. This is when it was dated. And then you can say, cancellation shall be obtained no later than the end of your inspection period. But you have to be transparent with that. In this case, we do not have another purchase agreement out there. Typically, you're going to have a warranty deed. If you don't know, ask your title person. Take possession immediately after closing. If you need to negotiate a rent back, You can do that here, right? So let's say in this scenario, the sellers, it's really competitive. We're giving them everything they want. And they're like, okay, well, we need to close on October 20th to close on our new house, but we want a week to move. So we want to close on the 20th, but we don't want to move out until the 7th. Well, you can put that in there. You can negotiate on your own with the seller what that rent back looks like, how you want to handle that, whatever that looks like, that is outside of the purchase agreement. Again, if you're in that scenario, call your launch coach, call me, we'll walk you through it. All right, a lot of boilerplate stuff. Buyer has the right for a final walkthrough. We know that. And the buyer has received a disclosure statement. So this checkbox here says that we received a seller's disclosure. That's that big long disclosure that they tell you everything they know about the house. This box here says that you received a seller's disclosure alternative. You'll get these in the event that the seller has not occupied the home, right? Say it's an investment property or it's a house they inherited from a relative. It's what the alternative says is that we have this home, we never lived in it, we don't know anything about it. It's sort of them waiving the disclosure. So you check one of those if you've received one. If none of these boxes are checked, you do not have a fully executed purchase agreement. You need to at least have received one of these signed by both parties, and they should be attached. Okay. Is it city sewer? Yes. No. City water? Yes. No. Is there a septic tank? Basically, does not know of any. Is there a well on the property? Does not. If there are either one of these, there are going to be separate well and septic addendums you have to have on here and separate inspections that need to be done by the city. Right here, we can see, great, it is not subject to those addendums, the subsurface sewage street treatment system and well inspection contingency. Oh, that's a mouthful. Okay, home warranty, typically I'm going to say no, right? Right here, I don't need to negotiate a home warranty plan. That's another little piece I like to use in inspection if I need to, right? Let's say there's like the appliances, like the water heater is like 50 years old, right? We're like, okay, that's obviously past its expected lifespan, but it still works, right? In that scenario, the seller is not going to replace it for you because it works. Maybe you want some insurance on it. Well, great, you can get a home warranty plan, but I'm not going to negotiate that now because I don't know if I need it. Dual agency. In this case is where we just close whether or not this is a dual agency deal. Thomas Charles Stanky is the selling agent in this scenario. I am the buyer's agent. We are from different brokerages, so it is not dual agent. If we were from the same brokerage, you would both click dual agent. But since we are not, we do seller's agent and buyer's agent. And then we can say dual agency does not apply. Obviously, if it did, we would say it does. A little caveat here. If you click does not apply, you do not need signatures on this block. If it does apply, you need signatures on this block. All right, and then we have other. This is where we can put in anything else we want on this. Typically, you're going to see, appraisal gap coverages, rent back clauses, some inspection terms, whatever, just yada, yada. If you have like an escalation clause on this, you might put that in right here. And again, if you have any questions about any of those, Coach, myself, we're already at almost an hour on this thing, so we can't go any further. All right. And then down here, if we do have any addendums or amendments attached to this PA, which you will, we need to check these boxes. So the most common ones we're going to have attached to this, right? Any general addendums, which you might. But what we will have is it's hard to read sometimes. Oh, never mind. Those ones aren't on there. Forget I said anything there. But okay, so I'll hit you with this. Oh, there it is. Sorry. Been talking too long, turns out. So line 481, you're going to have this on almost every property, that lead-based paint addendum. You may have, right, let's say we have that, and then we just have like a personal property addendum, right? Let's plug that in right there as well. Okay. Continue down. That's confusing. Why would I check that? I don't have it on the example I gave you. So the only one I have is this. So we're going to keep that. Okay. Move down. This is subject to. counter offer, right? If there was a counter offer given, this would be checked. However, this is our initial offer, so we have not had any counter, so we will not check that. The seller is not a foreign person or non-resident. If there were, it's okay. You can check yes, but there's going to be more taxes. And then the signatures, right? We scroll down. We have some fraud wire alert stuff. We need some signatures on too, just saying don't get scammed. But that's that, right? That's the PA from A to Zip. One last thing on here at the bottom of the signatures, we have the final acceptance date. You, the buyer's agent, do not fill this out. This date gets filled in by the sellers when they sign, because it could be a couple of days, right? And this final acceptance date dictates when that clock starts ticking for everything. All right. Well, I hope this was helpful. It took way longer than I thought, but it's a big document. So thanks for hanging in, and I hope this was A+. Bye-bye.